It's my wife, Jackie Seidensticker. We've been married, well, almost 49 years.
Congratulations.
49 years in August. I've worked for the Department of Agriculture. It kind of seems strange talking about agriculture, conservation, ties in with history, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But the last, I guess, close to 23 years of my working, I worked in a little town called Anahuac. And I really appreciate the flag up on the wall about 1824. If you've ever been to the state capitol, look on the floor of the state capitol around the rotunda, all the battles that took place in Texas. Well, Anahuac was one of the first battles. It was actually even before Velasco, the Battle of Velasco. And a lot of people in and around Anahuac talk about the real beginnings of the war started right there in Anahuac. Travis came all the way over from juvenile we're visiting, came all the way over to Louisiana to settle some property disputes with the Mexican general that was there at Fort Anahuac. A lot of the trade that went all the way up into East Texas had to go. Anahuac was right at the pinch point of the Trinity River, and a lot of the things that happened in and around East Texas, there weren't a whole lot of roads. Everything went by ship or by boat. The Brazos wasn't that navigable very far. The Colorado wasn't. San Jacinto had a big sandbar. You couldn't get up in it. The Trinity was about the only major tributary that was navigable. And Anahuac was right there, strategically located, and it controlled a lot of the commerce. Lumber coming south supplies and went north. So there was a big choke point. And it really, a lot of the disputes between Texas and Mexico started because of some of the disturbances. General Bradford, who was a Mexican general, but he was Irish, was there. He started a lot of the troubles. He captured a few of the Texas settlers. He would steal chickens and pigs for them to feed his soldiers because he didn't have enough funds from Mexico to supply them. So there's all kinds of disputes. And really, this is background. It doesn't have anything to do with my talk. It just reminds me about 1824 because the Texans at that time didn't want to rebel. They didn't want to secede from Mexico. But they wanted to go back because Mexico negated a lot of their land titles and made the settlers reapply for titles to their land, which they almost had to buy their land again. They didn't want to do that, which, you have a car, or if you have a house, imagine the state of Texas coming to you now and saying, hey, you need to reapply for your title. Well, that would upset you. Well, it upset a lot of it. And they drafted, prior to the Texas coming up with the certificate of independence or trying to get their rebellion against Mexico, they drafted what's called the Turtle Mile Resolutions. That file that runs right next to Anahuac, there is still a house where those Turtle Mile Resolutions were drafted, which predates the Texas Declaration of Independence. So there's a lot of history that goes on where we live. It's interesting, but what I'm here to talk about tonight is the Battle of San Jacinto. We're a historical group. I'm also a member of the Kendall County Historical Commission. We talk about history and we talk about places and things that happen, and the events that happen are important, but it's also important to recognize the places where they happen. Preserve the landscape, if it happens to be a battle or a historical building, happens to be a place like that. I'm a very visual person. You can tell me something or I can read something, I'm going to forget about it. If I see something, I can remember it and I can understand it. So our talk tonight is not just about the Battle of San Jacinto. A lot of you should know the history about what happened in the battle. But since that time, what's being done through the Texas Parks and Wildlife to preserve the landscape, to preserve the area around the battleground. Imagine we could do something like, everybody here knows about the Battle of Alamo and the massacre that happened there. But you go there and you see Alamo Plaza, and it's nothing like it was at the original battle. They didn't have, you know, the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum right across the street. You know, it's really not the same as it was at the Battle of Alamo. And you go to Brackettville, you can see where they have the reenactment of the battle there in the movie. You can see San Jacinto, and it's under the Texas Parks and Wildlife. They control it as a historical site. They maintain the battleground, the museum that's under the monument. But most importantly, what I'm talking about is the landscape around it. You can see this is the entrance to Alamo. You look at the landscape around, you can see a scattering of oak trees. There's a few other palm trees in there, which were native at the same time. But most of the landscape at the time of the Battle of San Jacinto was a tall grass prairie with a few interspersions of live oak trees. Texas Parks and Wildlife is doing a wonderful job of trying to maintain. Of course, I became good friends with the Natural Resource Director for Parks and Wildlife, and he and I talked. We were on several committees together looking at, and I got my degree in range management, and we talked about how to keep up a tall grass prairie. And I said, well, what you need? You need to have periodic fires. You need to run longhorn livestock through here. He said, well, we have close to 1 million visitors to San Jacinto a year. We don't have fences. We're not going to be able to run livestock. We're right next to several oil refineries. We're not going to be able to burn the prairie. So all they were left to do is maintain that tall grass prairie through mowing. And they have to periodically come through and mulch the park just to keep the invasive species down, just to try to keep a semblance of what it looks like. And this is the entrance road. And you can see off to the side, they still maintain a few scattering trees, but they still maintain, it's just freshly mowed here, but they still maintain that tall grass prairie, which is what it was at the Battle of San Jacinto in 1836. Pretty much the same, as much as possible. And Parks and Wildlife, the Texas Historical Commission, and there's also a group that does the battle reenactment. They all meet together and they try to maintain the park grounds. It's a very small park. It's probably less than 150 acres, but they still try to maintain it as much as possible, even though they're right next to an oil refinery. They're right next to a power generating plant. They're also right next to the San Jacinto, the Houston Ship Channel, where commerce comes. It's the second largest port in the United States.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What kind of grass was that tall?
Mostly blue stems, little blue stem, big blue stem, a lot of Indian grass, other species such as
is that the same kind of blue stem that we think of when we think of blue stem here?
You think of we're in a kind of a mid-grass prairie, lower growing. We're talking about grasses that were saddle horse high, and when they matured, a true tall grass prairie.
Yeah.
Very, very big, heavy, lush grass. And it maintained that way through ancient times through buffalo, periodically grazing.
Do you find it native still?
Huh?
Do you still find it in the state?
Oh yeah, it's still native. And the Parks and Wildlife is trying to do its job of trying to maintain all those plants. Of course, if you're familiar with, and by the way, you can stop me, this is very informal, you can stop me at any time you want to. But now right here, this next to the roads, probably not a whole lot of the big tall grasses, because they keep this mowed quite often. There are a lot of deer that wander through here. Plus they want to keep areas close to the road, close to where people drive, mowed down, so snakes or whatever, so you see what's out there. But you notice back in here, beyond the trees, that's probably more typical of the tall grass prairie. Let's look at there's several, I'll get to that in just a minute, some of the trouble they're having with invasive species. Most of the trees were either next to biles or next to streams, out in the open areas, away from the bile, away from the floodplain. That's where you had your true prairie. All your, most of your oaks were, this is right next to Buffalo Mile. This is where, Sam Houston had his encampment. This, under some of these trees is where, this is one of the earliest photographs of that area right next to Buffalo Mile, where Santa Anna surrendered to Sam Houston. So, very historical, but it still looks almost exactly like that. Very much so. This is some of the area they're trying to maintain as tall grass prairie. This is a plant called Chinese salad. It's an introduced plant. This is the one they have the biggest trouble trying to maintain. They have to, they can't let that go very long or and mow it down. You're familiar with Chinese salad?
I try to,
Got one in my front yard.
yeah, I got it all
Great
over.
breed.
Well, here it may be, but in southeast Texas, the high rainfall belt, the tremendous seed they produce, it can get out of hand in a hurry.
It's out of hand.
Huh?
Yes, I think it's out of hand too.
Yeah. But they do a fairly good job. These areas right next to the roads or next to the monument, they mow periodically, probably once every couple of weeks. This area they may only mow, twice a year because it's a big, broad area, but they do put mowers in. The main reason you ask why do they want to maintain that landscape, the big thing that goes on, how many of y'all have been to San Jacinto and seen the monument? Have you ever been to the reenactment where they do every year around April 21st? They do it one on the day of the battle, which was April 21st. They also do another reenactment on the weekend around that. Hundreds of people turn out for it, and they try to reenact the battle. And the people that participate in the battle, they go out of their way to do amazing things. The Mexican uniforms are all authentic. They have original equipment. You notice the guys aren't wearing any watches or rings or any modern equipment. They try to reenact the battle almost they take great detail in trying to get the thing enacted just as close as they could. You notice all the uniforms are all handmade. Of course, the Texans, no, wrong way. The Texans had they didn't have any organized uniforms. They had pretty much ragtag, whatever they could scrape together. It was farmers, most of them farmers or ranchers or tradesmen that participated in the battle. But they go to great detail to reenact that. And there's one other thing I'm trying to.
What do you know about the flags?
The flags? Back that up. That one I don't recognize. That's not the come and take it.
No.
I don't recognize the flag, but it is probably an authentic flag that they flew at the battle. Don't recognize anything in here.
like?
Huh?
No, he's looking at the different.
I don't, it's not in the flags that are in here. But I would be surprised if it was not a flag that was actually flown during the battle. The inscriptions, let me get this, I don't know if I get it all on there. No.
I can help you if you need. You know
Can
how
you
to
get
put
that?
it in slideshow mode?
What?
If you put it in slideshow mode, it'll help.
Yeah, that makes it bigger and it doesn't,
Does
Oh,
it on the
because of the
wall?
screen size. I
if
got
it
you.
makes it bigger, it doesn't show, doesn't show all the way. If I put it on slideshow mode, then it really gets
There's
too big.
Now I
Plus
understand.
minus in the bottom right you can do, I think.
Well, no, if you slide it from 100% to less.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. It'll
There
shrink
you
it
go.
just enough to. I would go to the subtraction side.
okay, I got you.
And now you can see it. Perfect.
Okay.
You're good.
This is just part of the inscription at the base of the monument. Measured by its results, the San Jacinto was one of the decisive battles of the world. The freedom of Texas from Mexico won here led to annexation and then subsequently the Mexican-American War, resulting in the acquisition by the United States of the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, Utah, parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. almost 1/3 of the present area of the American nation, nearly 1 million square miles of territory, changed sovereignty because of this battle and then subsequent. You think about that and what happened, and I think the biggest impact, that probably is bigger than any other battle. Added a third. So it's important that we, and I think Texas Parks and Wildlife is doing a wonderful job. The Texas Historical Commission and the reenactment gentlemen that do all of the, in charge of the reenactment, do a wonderful job. And okay, talk a little bit more about the battle itself, because before I get into the main part of my talk, can everybody, I don't know whether you can see it or read it.
Can't read it, but can see it.
But you can see, I'll point out with my PowerPoint, the trees that we're talking about, that I had the old picture photograph, that was this line of trees right along Buffalo Bile, which runs right along here. That's where the Texans had their encampment. The Mexicans had their encampment, well, it's just almost off the map. Right down here, that's where most of their encampment was. They had some breastworks back here. They had a lot of breastworks, which maybe they took saddles off the horses and put them down, and they hunkered down behind those. They knew where each other were. A lot of things that happened. One of the curious things that happened, everybody knows about the Yellow Rose of Texas and how Emily Morgan supposedly distracted Santa Anna, and while the Texans kept, that's probably true, but more importantly, the big mistake that Santa Anna made was there's a road running right here crosses Lynchburg Ferry that goes across and then on to Anahuac, but there's also a road that goes down here south towards a town called Red Bluff. But you could not jump into a boat and go down the San Jacinto River and get out to the bay. This was not, at this time, it was not navigable. There was a big sandbar that covered the area. So in order for ship traffic, you had to go further down into Galveston Bay. Well, a lot of the Texas government, Lamar and Burnett, they escaped the battle, and they headed south on this road, going to Red Bluff, and then getting on a boat at Red Bluff and going down to Galveston to escape Santa Anna and to get away from the battle that they knew was going to happen. Santa Anna took a big majority of his troops and went after them. Of course, Santa Anna stayed behind, but it was at this time, while he had split up his troops, that the Texans attacked Santa Anna, and that their deployment was greatly reduced, and so they couldn't hold on. That if Santa Anna had his full army right there, the Texans would have probably lost. So there's a lot of things that happened. Yes, Emily Morgan played a big role in it, but that's only minor. The biggest thing was when Santa Anna split his troops up, divided his troops. The other things I want to, here's Burnett's Bay. A lot of these landmarks are still there. Notice right in here, there's trees and there's open white area. It was where most of the prairie was. But the thing that looks kind of hash marked, this was all marsh. One of the things that the reenactment people wanted, and they studied the battle, where the battle took place, how things moved around, and they knew exactly right about in this group of trees, high ground is where the monument sits now. That's where the biggest majority of the fighting took place. That's where they tried to get the monument centered right at that location. But you notice when the Texans attacked, they had a front coming this way to attack the Mexicans. There's also a division of cavalry. The Mexicans had the cavalry on this, so it was a pincher movement. They had them surrounded. They couldn't retreat back this way. There's McCormick's Lake back this way. The battle lasted from 12 to 15 minutes. It was over with. The Mexicans retreated. The only place they could go was back this way to the Marsh. Well, what happened, and the Texans were very mad after Goliad, after the Alamo, they were very upset. So even though when the Mexicans retreated into the marsh back in here, they didn't just surrender. They lost their guns, they dropped their guns, whatever. The Texans stood on this high bank. It wasn't high, maybe 15 feet high, but they just picked them off. They were stuck in that mud, in that marsh. They just picked them off and massacred. It was a turkey shoot. I mean, it was really a terrible thing that happened. And it was cruel, but I mean, yes, go ahead.
What did they do to those bodies?
Okay, I'm gonna get to that in just a minute. The other thing that is curious, I want you to pay attention to is, this is McCormick's Lake. There was a lady by the name of Peggy McCormick. She was a widow lady. She had 2 sons. Her husband died around 1824, 1825, something like that. She owned this land. She owned the land where the battle took place. You heard the runaway scrape? Well, she left. This was a ranch. Her house was somewhere right about here, her homestead, but she ran cattle on this whole place. Well, when the Texans and the Mexican army came in, what did they do? They butchered all her livestock. Just took everything and butchered. Well, that number one was devastated. A few days after the battle, she and her sons came back, and she went to Santa Ana, number one, to try to get money back for her livestock. Well, Sam Houston didn't have any money. Number two, all these Mexicans were buried, had died out in the marsh and had died on the battleground. Of course, the Texans took care of their own, but the Mexicans lost the war and went to prison. They just let the bodies lay there. She was very upset. You can imagine an Irish widow woman. She was very upset. She went over to Santa Ana. He still had his encampment over here. And she confronted him and said, "What are you going to do with all these, this mess that's out here?" And Sam Houston said to her, "Madam, this is a famous battle. Your land is going to be history one of these days. It's going to be remembered forever." And she told him, said, "The hell with the history. Who's going to help me bury all these Mexicans?" And so what happened is she and her sons and a few neighbors had to go back and bury the bodies. The ones that were out in the marsh are still there, along with their rifles and buttons and uniforms and everything. They're still there. Nobody got those. Only the ones that were up on the prairie, on the dry ground, are the ones that they buried. And they, as near as everybody could tell, they just buried them where they fell. They just dug a shallow grave and put the bodies into the grave.
At least they didn't burn them. Like
No.
they did down.
No, but they did bury her. And I don't know, I asked a lot of people, did she ever get reimbursed for all the livestock that she lost? But McCormick's Lake is now changed. I think I've got another picture later on. It's not called Peggy's Lake. But it's still recognized, still like as near as I can tell, she ran into some financial difficulties and she lost the land. She's got some land somewhere else, but I mean, when you think about someone coming in wiping out all the livestock, she was devastated.
So the state owns that land now?
There's Parks and Wildlife owns the land now. But I want you to pay particular attention where this marsh is now. Also want to talk about Burnett Bay, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the land that's over here, the other side of Burnett's Bay. Anything else about the battle?
How many acres is it?
Oh, the whole park is probably about, it's less than 300 acres, something like that. It's not very big. It's not very big at all. They just own from Buffalo Bound, right along here, and down south, just a little ways. The monument is right here. They own a little bit south of Corbett's Lake or Peggy's Lake, a little bit. There's a big oil refinery that's right over here. And a power plant is right over here. Of course, Houston Ship Channel is they dug it and expanded. Now it's up Buffalo Bound. San Jacinto River is also navigable, quite a ways up too. Now, this is a more modern photograph looking at the battle took place right around here where the monument is. Of course, this is an artificial feature. They're still talking about that's not natural. They made it look like the Washington Monument,
Yeah.
reflecting the pond in front, which is kind of hokey. They're talking about filling this in and trying to get it even more historical. What I want you to look at is this is high ground now, but this blue is water. I started working with Parks and Wildlife and a guy by the name of Ted Hollingsworth, who is the natural resource manager with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And we talked about, we worked on restoring some of the prairie. And look, you've got trees interspersed with tall grass prairie around it. It's probably real close as we can get to what the landscape will look like at the time of the battle. But there is no more marsh. There's nothing there. The Texas Historical Commission, the battleground reenactment people, approached Texas Parks and Wildlife and Ted, and they said, "Can we get the marsh restored?" So Ted and I met with them and talked about it. Said, "Well, the problem is this area is affected by subsidence, which means the land is sunk quite a bit. The reason for that is all the refineries, all of the big part of southeast Houston, they pump water out of the ground. When you pump water out of a sandy aquifer, it collapses. Some of this area sunk as much as 10 feet. In order to get a marsh back, you've got to get it back to the elevation of a marsh. You can't grow marsh plants in deep water. This water, deep, relatively deep. Some of this maybe 3, 4, 5 feet deep. You can't grow marsh grass in that. We did some real quick little calculations to try to see about bringing dirt back in and filling that in. We came up with a figure of about $1.3 million. we and Parks and Wildlife didn't have that much money in their budget. The Historical Commission, just like any other, they don't have a whole lot of money. We didn't have any kind of money like that, so it went on the back burner.
Ducks Unlimited,
The
maybe.
what?
Ducks Unlimited, maybe.
Well, but this was back in '93. Didn't have that. Talk a little bit about the effects of subsidence. Remember I talked to you about Burnett Bay? There is a subdivision that went in right after World War II across from Burnett Bay. It's called Brownwood Subdivision. A lot of the people worked at Exxon refinery, Humboldt refinery at that time. It was a very beautiful subdivision right next to the water. Beautiful landscape. This is one of the older homes that was actually in that subdivision. Beautiful home. And the effects of subsidence is this. That land was only about 10-foot elevation. When you sink 10 foot, you're going to be right at the tide water. This was somebody's house. Very nice house. Had trees in the yard. Salt water comes in. That's what happens to a house. The same thing happened to that marsh that was around the battleground. And that's the reason it looks like open water. Ted also wanted, of course, it wasn't broadcast much, but he wanted to restore this back to a marsh because if you know anything about fish and wildlife, this is tidal water. It goes in and out with the tides. You get fish that come back in there. It's very, very shallow. In the wintertime, it's great. I mean, the fish come in and they have good habitat. When it gets May, June, July, and August, that water gets very, very hot. Sometimes the fish can't get out fast enough and they have a fish kill. Prior to restoring this marsh, they would have a huge fish kill out here. And I mean, hundreds of thousands of fish would die. It was a stinking mess. Once the fish died, it was prime mosquito habitat. The mosquitoes could almost carry you off. It's not a very appealing place to visit. So, but we didn't have $1.3 million to do anything. But then after that, shrink this down a little bit too. I happened to start working with a group that was restoring and trying to expand the Houston ship channel. It was not deep enough to carry the large draft vessels. They needed to deepen it and widen it, deepen it about 10 feet and widen it about 150 feet to accommodate larger vessel traffic, because they knew that the Panama Canal was going to expand. They needed to be able to get bigger, larger ships in. And so what to do with that, all that material that we're going to dig out of the channel is, it's close to 65 miles from, 35 miles, all the way from Bolivar Roads all the way up to the head of the channel at the Houston Ship Channel. Talking about a tremendous amount of dredge material. What to do with that? I was part of a group that looked at what's called beneficial uses of dredge material, part of the Corps of Engineers, Parks and Wildlife, General Land Office, NOAA. I work for the agency called NRCS, which is part of the Natural Resource Conservation Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the EPA. We were tasked to come up with a way to take that dredge material and rather than just dump it next to the channel or out in the bay, which would be environmentally not acceptable, but to try to come up with a beneficial uses of dredge material. Here's a photograph of, or overview of the channel. Here's Galveston Island. It's called Bolivar Roads, which is in between Bolivar Peninsula and Galveston Island. That's where the ship channel starts, comes all the way through the middle of Galveston Bay, all the way up to Baytown, which is right here, then all the way up the channel. Right in here, right there is Peggy's Lake. Peggy's Lake was changed from McCormick Lake, and Peggy's Lake goes all the way up to the Turning Basin and a little bit more up the San Jacinto River. This is the sites we came up with to take that dredge material and use it beneficially, mostly to make marshes with, restore marshes that were lost in Galveston Bay, and also to create mid-bay bird nesting rookeries. We also restored some old oyster shell reefs, and we came up with a way to add that material. Here's what a dredge looks like. This is the spud barge that takes the material and drops it off the end. This is where the pipe comes in. This is about a 30-inch pipe, goes across the spud barge and dumps it. And this is part of what we're doing, is taking open water and making marsh out of it. And this is what the end of the pipe looks like. We had to build a levee around the area to confine it, and we put the fluid material in it. Looks, when it comes out the end of the pipe, looks like about like this consistency of paint. Very, very thin. It's about 90-95% water. But it flows and fills these basins up quite a bit. And my job on part of this was to develop a technique of reestablishing the marsh. This is some of the seed that I have. This is all native. We're trying to get back a native natural habitat that was once there. And this is some of the seed that we seeded. There's a little process I have to go through to treat it. But then we had, this is a little later, but we had a hovercraft, and this is the dredge material. We let it settle and consolidate till it's about the consistency of toothpaste. Not anything you can walk on, but it's probably about 4 or 5 feet deep of mud, so you can see why we had to use a hovercraft to get out there. This whole area was seeded. You see it's about mid-tide level. About half of it was exposed at low tide, and half of it is right at the tide level. But all the seed in this whole area, this was about 65-acre site. This is another one of our restoration sites. All that seed came in this ice chest.
What kind of seed?
It's called smooth cordgrass. It grows specifically in saltwater. It's exactly what we wanted. Goes in their tile. This is what the grass looks like. This is the first, we planted it in spring. This is what it looked like that summer. So we came up with a solution. I went back to Parks and Wildlife and said, look, we have got a way to maybe restore the marsh. And we talked to, the Port of Houston, Houston Ship Channel. We talked to a barge company that needed to dredge out their barge slip. We talked to the people that had the, Houston Lighting and Power Plant. They needed to dredge out their entrance channel for barge traffic to come into their power plant. They donated, let's say donated all the dredge material. They were glad to get rid of it because most of the time they have to pay to dispose of this stuff. They have to go into upland disposal sites and they have to pay quite a bit. So they were more than glad to donate it to Parks and Lawn. The only requirement we had to go through EPA and test all the material, make sure it didn't have any toxic contaminants in it. They didn't want to, you don't want to dump something on a historical park that's going to be contaminated or cause more problems. Everything was fine. It had a little bit of high levels of nickel in the material, but it wasn't anything bad. It was just a little elevated. It did have a lot of oils, road tar. When you can imagine, everything that runs off the city streets of Houston flows into Buffalo Wild, and it settles in the bottom of the channel. So, but that wasn't any problem because when we created a marsh, that's like fertilizer to those plants. I mean, it really makes them go. This is a photograph filling in that area that I showed you earlier that had the open water. We filled it in all the way up to, and this was a big guess that we had to have, right at the elevation, and let it settle for 2 years. The elevation was going to be marsh, and it was, see the pants engineering, it was just a scientific wild guess that we had to do to get it to where it would settle down, get from the consistency of paint down to about toothpaste consistency. But we got it there. Only thing we had to pay for, instead of $1.3 million, the only thing we had to pay for was the cost of the testing of the soil and dredge material, which was a couple $100. But that was, we got it all donated, got it all done. And here is what the marsh looks like.
Looks like a marsh.
Huh?
Hey.
How did Harvey affect this?
Not a bit,
Really?
not a bit. It's a wetland.
Yeah.
It's
It
established.
absorbs a lot of the water. It's designed to go underwater, so it is fine. A lot of what you're looking at, the problems they had with Katrina in the area south of New Orleans, because they've lost so much of
Their
their marsh. This marsh acted as a buffer to absorb that wave energy to build it back.
Is that what they marched through for the battle?
You know what?
Is that what they marched through for the battle?
That's what,
That's-
when they retreated, the Mexicans retreated, that's what they fell back into.
Oh, okay.
You can see why they didn't have, they had a lot of trouble getting through that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, when we proposed this plan to the Historical Commission, we said, look, we're gonna put 3 or 4 feet of mud on top of whatever artifacts are down there. They said, fine. I mean, if it's buried under 1 foot of mud or 3 or 4 feet of mud, doesn't make any difference. It's preserved. So they had no problem with it at all.
Sounds like a classic win-win thing. It's a good deal for the industry and a good deal for history.
Oh, yeah. We restored about 8, didn't get all of it, but since that time, I've got another photograph. Since that time, they've completely restored all of the marsh. They had another chemical plant that had to do some dredging. After we did that, we got contact from University of Houston. They contacted us and said, "You've created a marsh. We need to get people out there to be able to see this, what you've done, because it's just like anything else. You wouldn't want to wade through that stuff. It's about 3 or 4 feet of mud. People are going to get stuck in there." So they contacted we got some grants, and they created a trail that went all the way from the monument, all the way across this marsh, all the way back to the ship channel and back around, and made a marsh trail out of it to where people could have access. The other thing, remember I mentioned the fact about the mosquitoes? Once we restored this marsh and got habitat back in there, the fish lived. They could live all the way through the summertime. They eat up all the mosquito larvae. My wife and I went last Was it last summer? Went, she had a class reunion back in Houston, we went back there, walked, not the whole trail, but we walked across the biggest portion of Marsh from the monument, all the way to this area, this high ground, not a single mosquito at all. This was in the middle of June.
What about hurricanes?
Doesn't bother them a bit. I mean, if it goes under 3 or 4 feet of water, that's fine. It's what was out there originally. We restored it back to what had been out there thousands of years, and it's doing wonderful. In fact, we took some pictures afterwards. That's what it looks like now. Some of it has gone into the little higher marsh. This is the original marsh. This is the deep marsh. This is marsh-hay cordgrass. We did not plant that, but that came in under natural succession, and it's come back in and reestablished. We did this restoration in 2003, and this is what it looked like in 2018. Still there, still functioning just exactly the way it's supposed to. This is part of the boardwalk that was across that. I didn't point it out, but historically there was a bile that went through this marsh. They called it Santa Ana's bile. It was open water when we started, but sure enough, after we restored it, that Santa Ana's bile has reestablished itself and is still there. This is part of Santa Ana's bile through the middle of that marsh, which was taken at the same time last summer. Still doing its job. This is from the top of the monument. This is that last remnant of marsh that was created back down here. This is still part of, well, it's not anymore, but it still is Peggy's Lake. I think Peggy's Lake is still going to exist. This is part of what Peggy's Lake was right in here. It'll probably still maintain itself as open water because you probably still want to have some open water habitat. Now the tidal entrance channel is over here at the bottom and goes out back into the San Jacinto River or Houston Ship Channel right here.
Do they allow fish in there?
Oh, you bet. Yep. But most people go in there bird watch. This is become a big bird watching
Oh,
area.
yeah.
And that's just about my talk, but the last thing we've got I want to show you is it's still under attack. Remember the fire they had about a month and a half ago? Right next to San Jacinto Monument Battleground. Still, and you can see how close industry is to that very nice natural area, so it's still under threat. They had to keep the whole battleground, the whole road.
Okay, now where's the battleship?
Back up.
I was wondering that too.
Well, see, the lady I sit by at church, she was the, what do you call her, that ship?
Me?
The lady, the head honcho there. And
It's not quite on this photograph, but the battleship is
but
off.
it's in that area.
It's right up in here. They've dredged out a little slip, and they've got the battleship right in here.
Really? Well, you wanna go somewhere?
You need to go. Everybody needs to go see, and if you can, go at a time when they do have a reenactment. It is really special.
I went to Baytown, but I'm sorry, I did not go there, I did not.
Well, that's reason to go back.
Maybe they did.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you for doing that, saving the marsh, and you know, I've always felt it was terrible they built all those chemical plants along the ship channel. In fact, I worked at one, and I was afraid that San Jacinto one day would go away.
Yeah.
But thank you to y'all's efforts. You know, it's still there, and it still looks like it has.
It's a lot closer to what it looked like before. In fact, it was neat. We got an award in 2004. It's called a Coastal America's Partnership Award. That we got all of us that worked on that restoration got a nice plaque, pass that around. And the Assistant Secretary of Interior came out and brought us the plaque and brought us the award. Also brought a letter from President Bush. So I've got a letter from President Bush congratulating us on the award.
What was the agency you were with again?
Huh?
What was the agency you're with again?
I was with Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service,
U.S. Department.
U.S. Department.
My daughter worked.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Medal or, award for, it's said Navarro slash, well, whatever his nickname was, something Garcia. And he's probably a Navarro descendant, But anyway, I think she was gonna kind of tell some of the events. We were gonna, Jesse drove us down there, because of Jesse,
Where'd you go?
to Corsicana.
Corsicana.
Corsicana, okay.
That county is after the Navarro, it was something, and also, what was the?
Because he was a politician, and they get the rights to do things, and, right, the politicians, and so, at some point, he got to name a county, and the county seat, which is Corsicana, and so it's Navarro County, the city of Corsicana, named after Corsica, Spain, and 'cause that was where Uncle Navarro, the first one to come to America from our genealogy, was from. So what's really was beautiful about this, there was 4 events, 4 things going on, and one was gonna be a parade the next day. Only problem was, because of the tornadoes in, upper Texas area, the city decided, no, we're not gonna have a parade. So one of the 4 things got canceled, but the other 3 went on. And so the first one was a dinner, and it was sponsored by the owner of Collins Bakery. Everybody knows the beautiful fruit cakes.
Oh, yeah.
He was,
My daughter keeps them in business.
he was in charge of not only the parade, the dinner, he was the MC, and then he sponsored our luncheon, so a lot of things. It was just tremendous. So that, the first night, our president emeritus spoke about Navarro. And you can imagine that the MC who introduced her and everything, and how the audience just, they all applauded, because he also asked would all the Navarro descendants stand up. And they were so pleased that so many of us went and participated in this. There was about 18 of us.
Oh, wow.
And then there were some spouses. There were spouses too. So we had quite a little group there. It was super nice. So then comes, because there was no parade, and this was part of those functions, we were to get, the Navarros were gonna get to see the courthouse that had been newly renovated. This is the Navarro County Courthouse. And so the judge met us all, and he took us up onto the 2nd floor of the courthouse. And you can imagine that it's 2-story. And in there, of course, how you'd see the jury box and all that. And then you look up and you could see, like, you'd think balcony, but not. It wasn't any wider than maybe 4 foot, but you could see some there and you would see some there. And he explained that during the time of prejudice and stuff, that the black people could only look from there. They couldn't participate down here. Yeah, so that was, something to learn. Then on the back wall, because there's the judge over there, is the big portrait of Navarro. So for us Navarro descendants, it was just like a really wonderful experience for us to go to. So after that, we go in front of the courthouse to the statue, and we take a picture, all the family members, and then we took several pictures, because some were with everybody that was there, but it was with the statue. So that was wonderful.
This is the statue, I'm gonna pass
Oh,
this,
yeah,
I'll put
pass
this
this
together.
around. Yeah, that's the statue.
I put it together, this is from Navarro House, but this is the statue that sits in front of the courthouse.
In front of the courthouse. It's been there a long, long time. I had seen it in something like in '96. And of course it hasn't changed, it's still the same bronze statue that's there.
When they restored the courthouse, the judge explained that they found a lot of history behind paneling, plaster, and what amazed me the most was the skylight. It was stained glass, and it was very, very large. The courthouse, where they would hold the court down here, is right in the middle, way up there, and to me, that was just so impressive. But we were we were treated like royalty.
Oh, we were treated like royalty the whole time.
And we visited a museum up there that, they had a lot of artifacts, and I could just picture our dream that we were gonna have when we have our library and the museum. Artifacts behind glass that were actually from that county.
That was called the Pioneer Museum, and the lady took us to go see all these things, you know.
And a stagecoach right in the grounds. Just beautiful, beautiful. Jesse took a lot of pictures that maybe later we can bring them to the next meeting once we have them developed. Because it was just this weekend.
Maybe July can have show and tell.
Yes, that's a good for the pictures.
As of now, Miss O'Neill is coming in,
Yes.
but I need to contact her.
Yes, Max?
Can I ask,
Yes.
when they made that flag? What year did they make the Texas flag?
I imagine in 1836 or
No.
something
Okay,
after that.
that's the flag that, Houston took across the flag?
No,
I don't know.
In the movie, it seemed like to me they had that.
It's 1824, that was the Mexican Constitution, that one,
1824.
that one 1824 was like, was in Washington's.
Cause they carried a flag in the movie across the fight Santa Ana.
Yeah,
It's usually
like you're
not
saying, there
after.
were several different flags, but most of them, if they were a company flag, military company flag, they were interesting and different, but this one represented the Mexican Constitution of 1824, and when they wrote the Declaration of Independence at Goliad in November of 1835, this is what they were complaining about, that Santa Ana had destroyed two little towns, Muir and whatever, were telling him that he wasn't obeying the Constitution of 1824.
Okay, thank you.
And so he wanted to shut them up, so he destroyed them. And the people in South Texas at Refugio and so forth are saying, oh my gosh, we're next. Because they were complaining too.
That's what, Anahuac, little town Anahuac, they wanted to go back to the Constitution of 1824 because when Santa Ana did away with the 1824 Constitution, because that's when we got our land and acquired it under, they didn't want to rebel, they didn't want to get independence, they wanted to go back to the original Constitution.
But Santa Ana had been a lieutenant under General Arredondo in 1813, when Arredondo came through here, and he had learned his lessons very well on how you treat those pirates.
This is,
She killed a lot.
the flag was in the reenactment, that's the
Oh, yeah.
Liberty flag was in the Battle of Jacinto.
Something that happened at the dinner was that the MC announced what's gonna happen next year. And I can't repeat this exactly right because I don't have a real good memory, but he was telling us that next year, it's gonna be a year before, and be the Marshall.
That's the ones in Texas.
Because we had one this year, but for next year, so it's gonna be very special. And we all do plan to go again, all of us, that's for sure. So,
The oldest veteran there was 99 years old.
yeah, 99. So much food you could not believe. And then he had gifts for us all. It was the little fruit cakes in tins, little tiny ones. They're just beautiful, and so everybody got those. So just a marvel.